Sinai. Why does it say Mitzion Teitei Sorrow? Why does the Torah come out from Zion when in fact it came from Sinai? So the answer is given. This is a Gemara in Baba Basra, second period. The answer is given that when all the regolim, the people that went up in the pilgrimage, all the Jewish people used to go up to Yerushalayim when the Beis Hamikdash, when the temple was in existence. They used to go and celebrate the Yom Tovim, the major Jewish holidays, Shavuos and Sukkot. These three major holidays used to go up and celebrate the Yom Tovim in Yerushalayim, and they would observe how wonderfully particular in every detail the Kohanim and the Israelim were in doing all the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. And they would also see the Yireh Shamayim involved there, the God-fearing of all these people, and how the Sanhedrin would paskin dinim, would cite questions of halacha, according to halacha. The Bala Turim is actually a Gemara in Shabbos that a person is obeyed, and he passes the dima halacha mita in a proper way. He's considered like a shutif, a partner with the Rabbi and Ma'aseh Bereshis in the creation of the world. And the Bala Turim brings it to halacha, the beginning of the kosher mishpat, the laws of judges. And when you judge a question of halacha correctly, you are a partner with God. And it's very good. That should be. So therefore, you've got to put together the Sanhedrin next to the Beis Hamikdash, that everybody should be aware of the fact that everything that we're doing is doing to fulfill the Ratzon Hashem. Once this happens, everybody else learns from that the Yireh Shamayim. And then truthfully, Ki Mitzion Teitei Zion goes out Torah, because there you learn the true way in which you have to serve God, with the proper awe, respect, and the love. Asher Tosim Lifneim, that you should place before them, Rashi goes on to say. The Rabbeinu Shalom, the Holy One must be, he says to Moshe Rabbeinu, don't think, Lomar, to say to yourself, or think to yourself, Ashana Lehem, Aperik, I will learn them the chapter, Ba'alocha, or the particular days, or give a bombing 2 or 3 times, until it would be ordered in their mouths, they can repeat it verbatim. Don't think that would be sufficient. They can repeat it by verbatim, like they know what they're talking about. See, that is not sufficient. If you're going to be a teacher, and Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, was the teacher to Kol Klal Yisrael. That's why he's called Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe our teacher. He is called Moshe Rabbeinu because he was to teach the Jewish people the Torah in a proper way. Not just to go over it, and that's it, and they can repeat it afterwards. That is not enough. What else you have to do? I won't bother myself. To let them understand the reasoning behind the matter. And this is very crucial. If you want to learn the Torah, especially when you will learn Gemara, you have to understand the reasoning behind all the discussion. Because this is the bottom line. What's the reasoning? If you understand what the reason is, then you can paskin, you can go to the Shulchan Aruch and you can understand what motivates the poskim there to make the decisions that they're making. They have reasons for what they're doing. They're not just in the Velta room, just going around and just making a decision without any basis on halacha. They have a certain reason why they're paskin shilas in a proper way. We're learning the Gemara Subas, where if there was an onus and the dogadach should never happen that the father of the chassan or the mother of the kala died at the wedding, we have a crisis. Here you have a wedding, you have to marry off the chassan and kala. At the same time, you have to bury the dead person. You've got to show recovered to the dead person, give proper plural. And at the same time, you have to make sure that the kala and chassan get married. So we accomplish both things. We put the dead body in a separate room, and the chassan and kala, we take them to the chuppah, and then they have bias mitzvah, and then they separate, and then the Rashi tells you to bury the dead person. Then you have doing shiva shemei amishna, and then shiva. So you try to take care of both areas, and this is all halakha. This is the way we have to understand. So when you go and discuss things, you can't just repeat it and not understand what you're talking about. The Rabbi says to Moshe Rabbeinu, you're going to teach Torah, you're going to teach Torah in such a way that they understand the reasoning behind it. If you understand the reasoning behind it, then Baruch Hashem, when it comes to Shaila, you can go and understand why it has to be fasted in this particular way and not necessarily in another way. The what? Remember the Gemara. We learned the Gemara. First you celebrate the 7 days wedding feast, and then the 7 days of Avelos. Now, if you bury the dead body before the wedding went through, then it would become on the chosen or on the kala, they become an oval. And an oval would be prohibited to have simcha. But if you first go and have the first get married first, so they already have, as to themselves, they have a yom. So you can't display publicly on a yom. Yes.
He's waiting for his lishkis.
Lishkis agozis.
Agazis or
agozis.
Agazis.
Yeah. All right. The body is immediately buried right after the consummation of the marriage. Yeah, that's it. I'll go over it again with you. I just quoted something that you've been learning, so I just wanted you to understand that we're just not just learning. We got to understand the reasoning. And that's why I have to go over it, not because I just want to burden you with going over and over the same thing, because there's so many different inyonim, that subject matters that you always have variety. And I like the variety that gives you interest, a high place. All right, let's go further. I won't bother myself to let him know the reasoning of the matter. The Pirush on its real under explanation. No more. Therefore, the Rabbi says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Asher tosim lidem, you must place it before them. What do you mean place it before them? Shulchan Aruch, like a table that's already prepared for a feast, as prepared to eat before a person. That's why they call it Aruch. It's a prepared table how a Jew should live, according to the East on the Talmud. And this is why it's very important. So you can't just learn by rote. So what if you can repeat things, but if you don't know what they mean, you don't have the underlying reasoning of it, you're not really learning at any degree of understanding. You recall that I learned with you to go from Metzil, the Lamed Gimel, about the different gradations of learning of Torah. If you learn Mikra, that is in the Tanakh, the Gemara says there, Mido to Mido. It's a standard, but it's not a standard. It will lead you to very great progression in the learning process of Torah. You get credit, of course. God forbid, don't misinterpret. You get credit for learning Torah, but you don't get progression. You need not only have to learn Torah, but you have to progress in your learning process. Mishnah, if you learn Mishnayos, and we learn Mishnayos, Baruch Hashem, it is a standard. You do begin to get competence in the capacity to learn further, and you do get reward for that because you're now progressing further into the learning process. Gemara, you learn Gemara, which is the reasoning, which is the whole procedure of all this. Learning the Gemara behind it. There's no greater standard, no greater capacity, vehicle of building excellence in understanding of the Torah than learning Gemara. And so therefore, it is very vital that we come to that madrega, that standard. We're constantly learning Gemara. I remember when I was, most of our time was spending and learning Gemara, because in fact, this is where you go to know what we had later on when I was starting to be a shofar. But by that time, I was already making a laning. I was learning it in front of the road. But learning Gemara, we have to learn Gemara to the point that we can make a laning. That means you can make new Gemara by yourself, without the teacher, which is a great kunst. And I had to learn that, and I learned that for many years, where I was able to make a laning by myself. I started the yeshiva, and after 3.5 years, I got that capacity to learn by myself already. But I was in the yeshiva for 13 years. So I didn't stop learning there, and of course I haven't stopped since. And I've been learning that for over 48 years. So it's a very important thing that you're trying to serve God. You're not looking for just a title. Title means nothing unless you really serve God to a higher and higher degree. And no matter how much Torah you learn, no matter how much Gemara you learn, there's always more to understanding of it. And even the great Talmidei Chachamim throughout the ages argue with each other as to how to explain a certain concept. In Halacha, they have arguments, and they're all great authorities. Everybody's great. God forbid, I should say one is less than the other. Of course, there are certain rules about who we pass, but they're all great. Everybody is trying to learn what the truth is. You have to learn the Torah before the Jewish people. It's a Gemara. Before Goyim, you don't teach the Torah. It's not permitted to teach the Torah to Goyim. When the Goyim learn Torah, it's considered an improper thing. But they're not commanded to do the mitzvahs. In the area of the 7 mitzvahs, B'nai Noach, 7 mitzvahs that all mankind is obligated to do, there it is permissible for them to learn. And there to become knowledgeable in these areas. But other than those 7 mitzvahs, B'nai Noach, so they are not permitted to learn Torah. And if they do, they're committing a sin. So they're not learning Torah the way it's got to be learned. Whereas Jews are required to learn all the Torah because we're obligated in all the Torah. They ask questions. I've had students that wanted to become Jews. Question is sitting, mother of a meeting I had one that converted already by conservative rabbis. And I told him that it was not recognized by Orthodox rabbis, and I being an Orthodox recognized that as a proper conversion. He learned from me several years. Finally, he was converted to be a Jew, an Orthodox. He insisted I be a member of the Beis Din that converted him. And then later on, when he got married to a Jewish girl, he insisted I be part of the 2 rabbis that married him. So he says, you seem to come to all my simchas. He says, you keep on inviting me. But at any rate, this young man was going to Northern Illinois University, and he set up a kosher kitchen there for the Jewish students there in Northern Illinois. He did a lot of other things there, trying to be. He was very sincere, and when he married the girl, he insisted the relationship, so he was sincere. And I had another one that was learning with me, and he was a kind of conversion, which again was not really a true type. He learned with me several years. He married a lady that also had gone through a conversion, her conversion by an Orthodox rabbi, and he learned several things, and finally, so they did that wedding too. But they were sincere and everything. Sometimes, unfortunately, people are not sincere in their conversions, and of course, we don't encourage converts. But if they're sincere and they want to become Jew after proper instruction, and they accept themselves seriously and the obligation to observe all the mitzvahs that a Jew is obligated to do, then they can become Jews. All right, let's go see what we got here. Even if Rashi says, the din echad, in a certain halacha, the din Israel, that they judge it just like the laws of Israel, all to be able to our codes shalahem. You're not permitted to break the law their courts of justice. Maybe Dini Israel, anybody who brings the laws of Israel and before the Goyim, profanes the name of God, as Hashem Lilim, and he sanctifies the name of the idols, to give them praise. It's not our rock, the God is not like their rock. Even when our enemies are the judges, when our enemies are the judges, they'll will be here also. This is some kind of a testimony to the elevation of the one that they fear. I had an interesting case. I'm a lawyer. I was in court once, of course, in the secular court, and I had a case. My client was a Jewish man, and the opposing man was also a Jewish man. And the opposing lawyer was also a Jewish lawyer, and the judge was the son of a rabbi. So we were claiming a certain amount. This is in the circuit court of Cook County. So we were claiming a certain amount of money, and the judge said, according to the first mission in government, according to the first mission in government. So I quoted the first mission in government. follows. Two people grab onto a bar. This one swears he doesn't have it less than a half. This one swears less than a half, the Yaploko, and they divide it. So that's what you do. Divide it. You get half of what you're asking for. Here it was like Kosh Shalachim. It was a court of Goyim, but actually it was all true, and it was decided according to. So it worked out fine. This is the way it is there.
With the address function, is there like two stages? One stage would be on that practice, and would go back to the word. Someone said that, some would say no.
Very good question. We're going to consider that. We're going to get there. We're going to get there. We'll discuss that very question. But I'll give you a little economic attraction. If the convert was converted by a Bezdin, and the convert was converted when they were a little child, they really didn't have any say in their mother, parents brought them in to be converted. When the little child gets bar mitzvah, mas mitzvah, at that point, it has at that period to make a decision. We to reaffirm what had been done or disavow it. And therefore, they would be considered as non-Jews if they disavowed it. If they affirmed it by their acting like Jews, then they're stuck with it. They remain Jews. Just like we're born Jews, we're stuck with it. Again, the person is a grown person, and they make a commitment to become a Jew. And if it was a sincere thing and was done before a proper rabbinical tribunal, they remain Jews, and they are just not good Jews, that's all, and they are punished God, and they are under the jurisdiction of the Jewish religion. But a lot of times, when a person is not sincere later on, there is a question whether they were sincere in the first place. That's where it hangs on the shayla. There was a very famous case that was decided about 20, 25 years ago in Eretz Israel. I think it was called the Langer case. There was a couple of people that fell in love, two couples fell in love, and it seems that the mother of one of them had married a convert, then without getting a proper divorce or what it was, she married a second person. I don't know, she married something, so it was a shayla whether the people, her children were mamzerim. A mamzer cannot marry a regular Jew. So these people, these grow up, they fall in love. It happens. And you don't always know who you're falling in love with. So they fell in love with regular Jews. The question is whether the regular Jews could marry them. And they were religious Jews. They were practicing religious Jews. And if they were mamzerim, they wouldn't marry them, even though they break their hearts. It's a big, difficult question. And the chief rabbi at the time adopted a liberal position, and he decided, he had some rabbonim, that conversion of the goy was not sincere, so therefore it was like she never was married to the goy. There are a lot of rabbonim who disagreed with it. It's just one of those questions of whether or not it was sincere in the first instance. If it's not sincere, every case is a different thing. You can't mind. In the case of Yisro, for instance, last week said that Rabbi, of course, knew what Yisro was thinking. So he informed Moshe Rabbeinu that Yisro was sincere. No, you got God to go and okay it, no problem. But we haven't come to that madriga yet. We're working on it. It takes a little time. Let's start to pass it to Justin. We've got 26 chapters. If you go through these 26 chapters written in English now, you start, and you do it, you come to Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. We haven't come there yet. 32, 26 chapters, do all the things that have to be done. Then you get there. Of course, the first thing is the right beginning. Right? But then you have to get the wonderful things that are necessary to get to that madriga. Does that answer your question?
So it's the accountability that gets up in part of this.
Of the obligation. Because a person is not sincere in his accepting that responsibility of being a proper Jew, is knowing the word conversion can be recognized as being proper. Absolutely. It usually is between God and us. Everybody has got to have to what we cannot really judge it. We can judge from the other actions, if we see from the other actions, we went through conversion, doesn't observe any of the mitzvahs, is very lax about it, that we have a suspicion that perhaps they weren't sincere in the first place. But we do make a decision. They make a decision that we have to make it. You see, the trouble is, the rabbis have decisions to make. You can't just stay and live in limbo. Somebody's fallen in love with somebody else. These are the children, they're innocent children. They didn't do anything wrong. Their parents that messed it up. That's the whole trouble. People do things, they don't think about the consequences of their actions. And they mess up somebody else's life. It's really a terrible thing. All right? Now let's go to the next pasuk, gentlemen. This is just one pasuk. We discussed it for half an hour. It's really an awful lot of material. I couldn't possibly do it. Perhaps we'll put another session or two. There's a lot of things there, and a lot of any of the wonderful things there. It's tremendous. All right? And even the little I discussed doesn't exhaust it, Baruch Hashem. I just discussed a little bit, just to give you an idea what it's all about. All right? You remember we learned in Kedushin. Remember that, gentlemen? And remember we learned about all the various kinyonim, in the first chapter of various things. And one of the things we learned in the second Mishnah, if you recall, we learned about about how acquiring second, third Mishnah. Just talking about an Eved Ivri, there were two types of slaves. There was a slave that was born a non-Jew. It was called the Eved Canaan, if he was a male, or if she was a female. But there was a slave girl. Now we're talking now first about an Eved, a Jewish slave. He usually becomes a slave if he stole something, he couldn't pay it back, or some other reason like that. He was sold into slavery. The ordinary time of when you acquire a Hebrew slave, usually must serve for 6 years, and in the 7th year he goes out free without any further payment. In other words, what you acquire when you acquire a Hebrew slave is his work. Truth is, you don't even acquire title to him. In the sense, he's not property. More or less, it could be described like a work contract. He has to work for his land, give him a grub stake. So they're talking to Gemara how much you have to give him so that he gets on his feet. He can reestablish his independence when he's free. At any rate, when you acquired it, so we said like this. Now Rashi said in the second line. That's 2 lines from the bottom of the first column, gentlemen. You got it? When you acquire a Hebrew slave, and it should read, this is a slave that was a Jew. Oh, I know perhaps. It's not no Hebrew. Or perhaps it was a slave of a Jew, of a Canaan. Or really a slave that was a Jew. That's why you call him Eved Ivri. And in such a person you say, Sheishanim Yavo, he should serve for some. Maybe that's what it means. What the Gemara Rashi is quoting is the arguments in the Gemara and what the words mean. It says, Eved means a slave, Ivri is Hebrew. And maybe it means just that he was owned by a Hebrew. Maybe it doesn't mean a Jew that was born a Jew and became a slave. Maybe it doesn't mean that. He's trying to say that. So what will I explain further phrase that you should inherit that? A slave is born a non-Jew, it is property. He passes an inheritance not that way. So what does it mean you inherit them? Perhaps I'll explain that means when you buy the slave from a non-Jew. That's why you there. On the field, when you bought a slave, I'm a government comes to let us hear. If you survive for yourself, when you acquire him, what he stole. In other words, later on he is punished by halacha double the amount of what he has stolen. Or perhaps it doesn't mean, or it could refer to a person that sold himself into slavery. He was a Jew, and because of the difficulties he had, he owned a lot of bills or debts or whatever it was, he had to get out of paying his debts, whatever it was. But perhaps if the person was sold by the rabbinical Shaklosh, perhaps he doesn't go out free at the end of the 6 years. He says, no, that's not the case. Yeshua Omer, when he says, when your brother in your local law and sold you, that's not about a person that sells himself. That's not because of his economic oppression. It's too poor. Times, what will I explain to Signa? When you acquire it, the renting perhaps a person that is sold by the rabbinical tribunal. It's trying to say there's no difference whether a person was sold by the Bezdin or he sold himself. In either case, he has the laws of an Ebed Ivri, a Jewish Hebrew slave. What it means, freedom. He goes out free. At the end of 6 years, to be free. This law was, unfortunately, that many Jews, during the time that this was, of course, not badly reputable, and as a result, this is one of the reasons that God punished the Jews. So all these laws are laws of God. They're not to be treated contemptuously, not to be treated as a Jew has certain rights, even if he is a slave. First of all, the Gemara talks about it. What does the Ebed Ivri, what rights does the Ebed Ivri have? First of all, he's got all the rights of a regular Jew. He's got to eat kosher. He's got all the other mitzvahs. You as the master have to see to it that he does all those things, that he can do all those things. You have to put in such burden on him to keep him from doing it. A little further, we have an extra pasuk. It's got to be good with the Ebed Ivri with you. An extra pasuk. What does that mean? If it happens that the master had one pillow in the household, the pillow had to be given to the Ebed Ivri, and he had to do without the pillow, because the Ebed Ivri has to be comfortable. He had to, even if the master had to suffer some inconvenience. So you see, this slave was not like an Uncle Tom slavery, where they had to oppress anybody who was born a non-Jew. Certainly not a Jew. Once you get the improper intent, imagine it's some kind of oppression. It was a method in which they utilized to judge certain situations. This is the way one was sold for that purpose. They ought that, no. And that's what it says. If he came in alone, if he's not a Jewish, was his wife ever a slave? No. He was sold, not she. So what does it mean his wife goes out with him? Isn't that a good question? That's what Rashi's got to say. Middle column, second column. You see, everything here asks for questions and answers. And this is what the Gemara discusses. Every single item doesn't just go to say, read a pasuk, and that's it. There is a reason behind everything, and it has to be discussed thoroughly, and that's what the Gemara does. And before you can understand what the halacha is, you have to discuss the Gemara. Learn it and learn it. Then you can go to Shulchan Aruch and see how they pass it over. He comes in alone. Like he had not married a lady, like the Uncles. He will Gohi, the O, means alone, king and alone. Gohi means alone in Arabic. If he came in Yachidi, alone, something, usual form of the word. Kapo is like a wing. Kosher hu Yachi is comes just he was alone. The show within his clothes, a kind of big dough, the covering of his clothes. And he goes out the way he came in. The couple you see goes out alone. Baki, from here we learn out. If he wasn't married in the beginning, before he became a slave, no Shipakani, the master has no permission to hand over to him a female slave who is born a non-Jew, the Holy Mimeno Abodi, to propagate from new slaves. One of the tasks of a Hebrew slave was to propagate new slaves. But that could only be done if he had a Jewish wife. Because we were concerned that perhaps if he had just a lady that was born a non-Jew, she might lead him astray from Judaism. We didn't want that to happen. So in those days he could have more than one wife. He had to have at least one wife that would make him. Of course, if a Jew, a non-Jew as a slave, the non-Jewish slave, the Abinadi or the went through a beginning of a long period which we would call corresponding to a conversion situation. As soon as they became a slave, they went through a big conversion, just like you're going to become converted, and they become. And in the case of a male slave, he has a circumcision, the same state of being a slave. And he has all the obligations of a female slave as well, of a Jewish lady. And the Shifchot Malis has to observe Shabbos, has to keep kosher, has to do all the other mitzvahs of Jews. And when they're finally freed, if they are free, they become full-fledged Jews. They're called slaves that are free. They can marry regular Jews, Yisrael and a lady, not a Kohen. If he's a husband of a lady, maybe he's the husband of a Jewish lady. So that's one of the commentaries on the both. His wife goes out with him. Who brought her into being a slave? Shetete. Then she had to go out. Doesn't make sense. Because it says, when does a person become freed from slavery? If he was a slave. If he was never a slave, what does it mean? Because she goes out with him. It's got to make some sense, right? Here we relate something, another news. Something the pastor is telling us. A person that acquires the Hebrew slave and the children of the Hebrew slave. Remember we learned the Gemara and Sulas marries a wife. One of the obligations he has to do is feed his wife. If he becomes a slave, then is to be assumed by his master. He's got to feed the wife, and he's got to feed the kids. And as long as that man remains a slave, doesn't mean that she was ever a slave. So, you read the word, you would think this. All right, we'll hold this like that.